Vivian Winters sat in the airport lounge, staring at the termination notice she just signed. The flight attendant who had refused her first-class seat now stood before her, face drained of color. Sometimes justice wore a designer suit and carried the power to reshape entire companies. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice served, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of storytellers and truth seekers. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in action? This tale of power, prejudice, and sweet justice might just change how you see the world of corporate America forever. Vivian Winters never planned to become a symbol of change in corporate America. The 38-year-old black woman had simply focused on excellence at every turn, letting her brilliance illuminate paths where others had placed barriers. Growing up in a modest brick house on Detroit's east side, young Vivian had watched her father leave for work at 4:30 each morning. His Detroit Metropolitan Airport maintenance uniform pressed to perfection despite the pre-dawn hour. "Aviation doesn't sleep, Vivi," he would tell her while gulping down black coffee. "And neither do the people who keep it running." Her mother, a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school, had instilled in Vivian a reverence for education that bordered on religious devotion. Their small living room bookshelf sagged under the weight of encyclopedias, business magazines, and aviation journals her father brought home from airport newsstands when passengers left them behind. "Knowledge doesn't care what color your skin is," her mother would say, tapping Vivian's forehead gently. "Fill this up, and no one can empty it." By 12, Vivian could name every major airline's fleet composition. By 14, she understood their business models. By 16, she had mapped out her future with the precision of an air traffic controller guiding planes through a storm. Her high school guidance counselor had laughed when Vivian said she planned to attend Harvard Business School. "Be realistic," the woman had said, sliding community college brochures across her desk. "Those Ivy League schools, they're not really for girls like you." Vivian had taken the brochures, thanked the counselor politely, and then stayed up 3 consecutive nights perfecting her application essays. When the thick acceptance package arrived 6 months later, along with a full academic scholarship, her parents had framed both the acceptance letter and a photo of Vivian's stunned guidance counselor holding the Harvard admission packet Vivian had hand-delivered to her office. Harvard had been exactly as challenging as Vivian expected, and exactly as biased as her parents had warned. In study groups, her ideas were ignored until repeated by white male classmates. Professors seemed surprised when her papers earned top marks. Fellow students asked if she was there on some kind of special program. One particularly bold classmate had asked her to share her perspective as a black woman during a finance discussion that had nothing to do with race or gender. "My perspective as a person who actually did the reading is that leveraged buyouts require careful analysis of debt service capabilities," she had replied, earning nervous laughter. And one high five from a South Asian classmate who became her friend for the remainder of the program. Graduation had placed her in the top 3% of her class, with job offers from consulting firms, investment banks, and 3 Fortune 500 companies. She had chosen Skyline Aviation, a mid-sized airline with solid fundamentals, but outdated management practices. The starting salary was 30% lower than her highest offer, but the growth potential seemed limitless. "You'll be stuck in middle management," her Harvard advisor had warned. "The airline industry is one of the last boys' clubs in American business." Vivian had smiled, thanked him for his concern, and accepted the Skyline offer the same day. The first 5 years had proven her advisor partially right. Despite implementing cost-saving measures that added $43 million to the company's bottom line, Vivian remained in her initial position while watching 5 white colleagues with lesser results receive promotions. Rather than grow bitter, she grew strategic, documenting every accomplishment, building alliances with board members, and making herself indispensable to operations. Her breakthrough came during the fuel crisis of 2018, when her innovative hedging strategy saved Skyline from the bankruptcy that claimed 2 competitors. Overnight, Vivian advanced 3 levels, becoming the youngest vice president of strategic planning in company history. 3 years later, she added chief operating officer to her title. When Skyline's CEO announced his retirement last year, the board conducted a 6-month search while Vivian continued quietly improving operations. The headhunting firm presented 12 candidates, 11 white men and 1 white woman. The board interviewed all 12, plus Vivian. Her presentation on Skyline's future had left the boardroom silent for 30 full seconds before erupting into applause. The vote had been unanimous. 6 months ago, Vivian Winters became the first black female CEO in the airline industry, making headlines across business publications and morning shows. The congratulations had barely subsided before the whispers began. Could she handle the pressure? Was this a publicity stunt by the board? How would she manage the old guard executives who had been passed over? The industry's legendary Good Old Boy network closed ranks, with several rival CEOs, coincidentally, unable to attend her welcome reception. Vivian had anticipated this. She'd experienced every form of professional skepticism before. Just never at this scale or visibility. She approached her new role with the same methodical excellence that had defined her career, working 14-hour days and delivering 2 consecutive quarters of record profits. Now came her biggest challenge, yet negotiating a merger with Pacific West Airlines that would create the country's 3rd largest carrier. The preliminary talks had gone well, but the final negotiation required her physical presence in San Francisco. The board chairman had made his skepticism clear during their last meeting. "These Pacific West boys play hardball," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair. "They'll try to intimidate you. Maybe we should send Reynolds as backup." Thomas Reynolds was a board member with half Vivian's qualifications and twice her confidence. She had smiled thinly. "I've reviewed their financials, fleet compatibility, route synergies, and corporate culture assessments," she'd replied. "I've also compiled a comprehensive negotiation strategy with 3 alternative positions depending on their approach. But if you feel Mr. Reynolds would add value, I'm certainly open to collaboration." The chairman had backpedaled quickly, mumbling about her being more than capable. Vivian had nodded and exited the meeting, returning to her office to add final touches to her presentation. The merger would define her legacy as CEO, potentially securing Skyline's future for decades. Failure was not an option. The night before her flight, Vivian had packed methodically. Her navy Armani suit for the main negotiation, her burgundy Chanel for the welcome dinner, her casual but elegant Prada ensemble for the facility tour. Her Louis Vuitton luggage contained everything necessary to project power, competence, and unshakable confidence. She had learned early that appearance mattered doubly for black women in executive roles. Too casual meant not being taken seriously. Too flashy meant being seen as unprofessional. She walked a perfect line between powerful and approachable, her wardrobe a carefully constructed armor against biased perceptions. Vivian reviewed her presentation one final time before bed, mentally rehearsing responses to potential objections. The merger would happen, Skyline would thrive, and one more glass ceiling would shatter under the weight of her undeniable competence. Tomorrow's flight to San Francisco was just the beginning. Atlanta International Airport buzzed with its usual frenetic energy as Vivian Winters wheeled her Louis Vuitton carry-on toward the priority check-in counter. 6:30 in the morning, and the terminal already swarmed with business travelers clutching coffee cups and scrolling through phones. Vivian had chosen the early flight strategically. Arrive in San Francisco by mid-morning, review her notes over lunch, and enter the preliminary meeting refreshed and prepared. She wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit with subtle gold accessories, her natural hair styled in a sophisticated updo. Professional, polished, powerful, exactly the image a CEO should project. Yet as she navigated the terminal, she noticed the familiar sidelong glances, the subtle double takes, the momentary confusion in people's eyes before they looked away. 20 years in corporate America had taught her to recognize the look. That doesn't match what I expected. At the priority check-in desk, a young attendant glanced up with the automatic smile reserved for first-class passengers, then paused, her eyes dropping to Vivian's boarding pass and back to her face. "Good morning, Ms. Winters?" she said, her voice rising in question. "That's correct," Vivian replied evenly. "And you're flying first class to San Francisco today?" Another question where there should have been a statement. "Yes," Vivian maintained her pleasant expression, having long ago learned that showing irritation only reinforced stereotypes about angry black women. The attendant's fingers hovered over her keyboard. "May I see some ID, please?" Vivian produced her driver's license, watching as the young woman compared the photo to her face with unnecessary thoroughness. Around them, white business travelers were being processed with cheerful efficiency, rarely asked for identification verification. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. Your first-class boarding pass." The attendant finally handed over the embossed ticket jacket. "The Skyline Premier Lounge is located past security on your right. Enjoy your flight." The security line moved quickly for priority passengers. Vivian placed her Rolex, gold earrings, and phone in the tray, wondering absently if the security officer would make the same assumption many had before, that such luxury items must be knockoffs when owned by someone who looked like her. Inside the Skyline Premier Lounge, Vivian selected a quiet corner seat with a view of the tarmac. She ordered a sparkling water and opened her laptop, intending to review the merger documents once more before boarding. Two middle-aged white executives took seats at the table beside her, their conversation loud enough to be unavoidable. "Pacific West is smart to consider the merger," said the first man, swirling amber liquid in a tumbler despite the early hour. "Skyline's been making interesting moves lately." "Interesting is one word for it," his companion replied. "Bold is another. Not sure about their new leadership, though. Seems like a publicity play to me. Diversity hire." "Haven't met her, but the numbers don't lie. 2 record quarters isn't luck." "Sure, but can she handle something this big? Airline? Mergers are complicated. Takes a certain type of experience." Vivian continued typing, her face impassive though her jaw tightened slightly. The certain type of experience they referred to typically translated to white and male in industry speak. The lounge attendant approached with her sparkling water. "Here you are, ma'am," she said, placing the glass down before hesitating. "I'm sorry, but this section is reserved for our first-class passengers and Platinum Elite members." Vivian looked up from her laptop. "I'm aware, I'm in first class." She gestured to the boarding pass beside her computer. "Oh." The attendant's eyebrows rose. "My apologies. Can I get you anything else? Perhaps something from our complimentary breakfast selection?" "No, thank you." Vivian returned to her work, ignoring the sudden silence from the neighboring table as the executives processed what they'd just overheard. At precisely 7:15, the lounge attendant announced boarding for Skyline Flight 1382 to San Francisco. Vivian packed her laptop, straightened her jacket, and wheeled her carry-on toward the gate, professional mask firmly in place despite the familiar burn of indignation in her chest. The gate area was crowded, passengers already forming the haphazard lines typical of boarding time. Vivian approached the priority lane marked for first-class and elite status members. As she did, a flight attendant with a blonde bob and crisp uniform stepped forward, positioning herself at the lane entrance. The flight attendant's name tag read, Karen Walsh, above the gold wings that indicated her 15 years of service. Her smile seemed practiced as her gaze swept over the gathering passengers, but it faltered when it reached Vivian. "Good morning," Vivian said, presenting her boarding pass. Karen Walsh did not extend her hand to take the document. Instead, she pointed toward the main boarding line. "General boarding will begin shortly. This lane is for first-class and elite members only." "I'm aware," Vivian replied, extending her boarding pass further. "I'm in first class." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. "There must be some mistake. This is the first-class line." Her emphasis on first class carried a weight of implication. "There's no mistake," Vivian said, her voice pleasant but firm. "Seat 2A, first class." The flight attendant reluctantly took the boarding pass, examining it with exaggerated care before looking back at Vivian with unconcealed suspicion. "How did you get this boarding pass?" Karen asked, her tone suggesting impropriety. The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. Several passengers turned to watch the interaction, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to curious. "I purchased a first-class ticket just like everyone else in this line," Vivian answered, maintaining her composure through practiced discipline. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "These tickets are quite expensive, over $2,000 for this route." "I'm aware of the cost," Vivian said, extending her hand. "My boarding pass, please." Instead of returning the document, Karen turned and beckoned to another crew member. "James, can you come here for a moment? We have a situation." Vivian felt her heart rate increase, though her expression remained neutral. 20 years of corporate navigation had taught her to recognize dangerous moments. This was rapidly becoming one. James Chen, a younger flight attendant with an assistant, purser badge, approached with a professional smile that quickly faltered as Karen spoke in a stage whisper. "This woman claims she has a first-class ticket. Can you verify if this is legitimate or if there's been some kind of mistake?" She handed him Vivian's boarding pass. "Maybe a system error or an unauthorized upgrade?" The implication was clear. Vivian couldn't possibly belong in first class legitimately. James glanced at the boarding pass, then at Vivian, then back at the pass. His eyes widened slightly. "Ms. Winters. Vivian Winters." "Yes," Vivian confirmed, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the growing audience of curious passengers. James's posture changed immediately, straightening to attention. "Ms. Winters, welcome aboard Flight 1382. We're honored to have you flying with us today." He shot a panicked glance at Karen, whose expression had frozen in confusion. "You know, this passenger?" Karen asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. James swallowed visibly. "Karen, this is Vivian Winters. She's the CEO of Skyline Aviation." The color drained from Karen's face as the implications crashed over her. Around them, passengers who had been pretending not to watch suddenly found their shoes, phones, and boarding passes intensely interesting. "The CEO?" Karen repeated, her voice faint. "Yes," James confirmed, handing the boarding pass back to Vivian with slightly trembling fingers. "Ms. Winters, please accept my sincere apologies for any inconvenience. We're ready to board you immediately." Karen stood rooted to the spot, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound. Finally, she managed, I had no idea. You don't look like..." "Like what, Ms. Walsh?" Vivian asked quietly. Karen faltered. I wasn't expecting the CEO to be black," Vivian finished for her, voice still measured and calm. A mortified flush replaced Karen's pallor. "That's not what I meant. I just didn't recognize you." "Interesting. I don't recall our previous meeting." Vivian's gaze was level. "But I'll certainly remember this one." She accepted her boarding pass from James and walked past the still-stunned Karen toward the jet bridge, her posture impeccable, her expression composed. The whispers began before she was out of earshot. This was far from Vivian's first experience with prejudice, but something felt different this time. Perhaps it was the culmination of too many similar incidents. Perhaps it was the public nature of the humiliation. Or perhaps it was simply that she now possessed the power to demand accountability, rather than silently absorbing the indignity, as she had been forced to do countless times before. As she settled into seat 2A, stowing her carry-on in the overhead compartment and arranging her laptop for the flight, Vivian made a decision. This incident would not be brushed aside or minimized. This time, there would be consequences. James Chen appeared beside her seat, his expression still mortified. "Ms. Winters, can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Champagne, perhaps? Or coffee?" "Sparkling water, please," Vivian replied. "And Mr. Chen, I'd appreciate it if you could ensure that Ms. Walsh is not assigned to serve the first-class cabin during this flight." James nodded quickly. "Of course, Ms. Winters. I'll serve first class personally. Again, please accept my deepest apologies." As he hurried away, Vivian observed Karen Walsh boarding other passengers, the flight attendant's movements now stiff and her smile brittle. Their eyes met briefly, and Karen quickly looked away. Vivian turned her attention to her phone, opening her contacts and scrolling to Devin Carter, HR Director. She began typing a message, her fingers moving with purpose. The flight to San Francisco would take approximately 5 hours. Vivian intended to use that time constructively. This incident would become a catalyst for change, not just for one flight attendant, but for the entire corporate culture she now had the authority to reshape. As other first-class passengers boarded, Several glanced at her with new recognition. Word having spread about her identity, Vivian nodded politely but remained focused on her phone, the beginning of a strategy already forming in her mind. Karen Walsh had just made the biggest mistake of her professional career, and Vivian Winters, the CEO she hadn't believed belonged in first class, would ensure it was also her last at Skyline Aviation. The Airbus A320 pushed back from the gate right on schedule, the engine's low rumble vibrating through the first-class cabin as Flight 11382 began its journey to San Francisco. Vivian placed her phone in airplane mode but kept it in her hand, the message to Devin Carter saved as a draft. She would send it once they reached cruising altitude and the Wi-Fi activated. James Chen moved efficiently through the first-class cabin, serving pre-departure beverages and hanging jackets with the practiced grace of a seasoned flight attendant. His smile remained fixed, but couldn't quite mask his anxiety as he attended to Vivian. "Your sparkling water, Ms. Winters," he said, placing a crystal glass on her armrest. "Is there anything else I can provide before takeoff?" "No, thank you," Vivian replied, then added, "Mr. Chen, please relax. You're not responsible for Ms. Walsh's behavior." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. It's an honor to serve you today." As James continued his preparations, Vivian noticed Karen Walsh hovering near the galley divider, ostensibly arranging meal trays but repeatedly glancing toward seat 2A. When their eyes met, Karen quickly looked away, her movements becoming frantic and disorganized. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming passengers aboard Flight 1382 to San Francisco. "Flight time today will be approximately 4 hours and 55 minutes with good weather expected throughout our journey. Our flight attendants will be coming through the cabin once we reach cruising altitude." Vivian closed her eyes during takeoff, not from fear, but to center herself. The confrontation at the gate replayed in her mind, each dismissive gesture and presumptive comment cataloged with perfect clarity. 20 years of similar incidents had taught her to remember every detail, every microaggression, every moment. When someone decided she didn't belong. Have you ever been judged based solely on your appearance? Has someone ever assumed you were in the wrong place simply because of how you look? Comment number 1. If you've experienced prejudice like Vivian, or number 2 if you've witnessed it happening to someone else. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of justice served. But seriously, what would you do in Vivian's position now? Would you let it go, or would you use your power to make a statement? The confrontation is just beginning. The seatbelt sign dinged off at 33,000 feet, and James appeared with a warm towel and the breakfast menu. "We're offering either a vegetable frittata or Belgian waffles this morning. May I get your selection, Ms. Winters?" "The frittata, please, and coffee when it's ready." "Excellent choice." James hesitated. "Ms. Winters, I want to personally apologize again for what happened at the gate. It doesn't reflect our company values or training protocols." "Doesn't it?" Vivian asked quietly. "Because this isn't an isolated incident, Mr. Chen. Not for me, and certainly not for other passengers who look like me, but don't have CEO as a shield." James swallowed hard. I understand, and I agree it's unacceptable." "Then why has it been accepted? For years?" Vivian's tone remained conversational, but her gaze was unflinching. "How many complaints about Ms. Walsh have been filed before?" James glanced nervously toward the galley where Karen was now vigorously arranging coffee cups. "I'm not sure I should." "You work for me, Mr. Chen. Every Skyline employee does." Vivian's voice dropped lower. "How many complaints?" "Several," James admitted, almost whispering. "At least 5 that I know of. Maybe more." "And the outcomes?" "Dismissed. Classified as misunderstandings or passenger confusion." James looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Some of the senior crew have certain ideas about who belongs in first class. It's never officially stated, but it's understood," Vivian finished for him. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Chen. That will be all for now." As James retreated to the galley, Vivian activated her phone's Wi-Fi and sent the draft message to Devin Carter. Then she opened a new document and began typing notes about the incident with clinical precision. Time, location, exact words, exchanged. 20 years of documenting discrimination had made her meticulous. The cabin service began with James serving first class while Karen and another attendant handled the main cabin. Vivian noticed that Karen made a point of avoiding the first class section entirely, not even making eye contact when passing through to the forward lavatory. Halfway through the meal service, however, Karen appeared beside Vivian's seat, her expression a mask of professional contrition. "Ms. Winters," she began, voice pitched low, "I wanted to personally apologize for the misunderstanding at the gate. I didn't recognize you and I was simply trying to ensure our boarding procedures were followed correctly." Vivian took a sip of her coffee before responding. "Was I not following procedures correctly when I presented my valid first-class boarding pass, Ms. Walsh?" "Well, yes, but," Karen faltered, "sometimes passengers get confused about which line to join." "I wasn't confused. You were. It was an honest mistake." "Was it?" Vivian placed her coffee cup down. "Would you have questioned a white man in a business suit presenting the same boarding pass?" Karen's professional veneer cracked slightly. "This isn't about race." "Then what precisely was it about, Ms. Walsh? Please explain why you felt the need to question my legitimate presence in the first-class line when I presented valid documentation." The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "We've had instances of passengers trying to board with the wrong class of ticket." "And what about me suggested I might be one of those passengers?" Karen had no answer, her mouth opening and closing, silently. "That's what I thought," Vivian said quietly. "You made assumptions based on my appearance. You decided I didn't fit your mental image of a first-class passenger. And when I didn't, you publicly challenged my right to be there despite evidence to the contrary. I didn't mean to offend. Intent doesn't negate impact, Ms. Walsh. And this isn't about my feelings. It's about a pattern of behavior that damages our brand, alienates customers, and creates a hostile environment." Vivian's voice remained calm, but her eyes were steel. "Now, I'd appreciate if you'd allow Mr. Chen to continue serving this cabin, as I requested earlier." Karen's face flushed deep red. "Of course, Ms. Winters. Again, I apologize for any inconvenience." As Karen retreated hastily to the main cabin, Vivian noticed several other first-class passengers watching the interaction with varying expressions. Some seemed uncomfortable, quickly averting their gaze when she looked their way. Others offered small nods of acknowledgement or understanding. The white businessman across the aisle leaned slightly toward her. "Been flying Skyline for 15 years, he said quietly. "Never seen anything like that at the gate. Completely unprofessional." Vivian nodded in acknowledgement but didn't engage further. She had learned long ago to be cautious of white allies whose support emerged only after her status was established. Where was his outrage when he witnessed the initial discrimination? Her phone vibrated with an incoming message from Devin Carter. "Received your report. Disturbing, but not surprising. Looking into Walsh's file now. Call when you land. This needs immediate attention." Vivian sent a brief affirmative response before returning to her documentation. By the time the meal service concluded, she had compiled a comprehensive account of both the gate incident and Karen's subsequent attempt at damage control. For the remainder of the flight, Vivian observed the dynamics of the cabin crew. James provided attentive service to first class, while Karen remained conspicuously absent, except when necessary to pass through to the forward galley. When she did, her body language was tense, her eyes fixed straight ahead as if Vivian might disappear if not acknowledged. Other passengers occasionally glanced between the flight attendant and the CEO, the earlier confrontation having established an unmistakable current of tension. Vivian remained outwardly composed, reviewing her merger documents and making occasional notes, but her mind continued processing the larger implications of what had occurred. This incident was a symptom of a deeper cultural problem within Skyline. For Karen Walsh to have behaved so brazenly, and for similar complaints to have been dismissed previously, suggested institutional tolerance for discriminatory practices. As CEO, Vivian now had both the responsibility and authority to address these systemic issues. The remaining hours of the flight passed without further direct interaction between Vivian and Karen. James provided impeccable service, perhaps compensating for his colleagues' behavior with extra attentiveness. As the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco International Airport, Vivian gathered her materials and prepared for arrival. The captain's voice announced their approach to San Francisco, thanking passengers for choosing Skyline Aviation. When the aircraft touched down and taxied to the gate, Vivian remained seated as other passengers gathered their belongings and filed toward the exit. James approached hesitantly. "Ms. Winters, can I assist you with anything?" "Yes, Mr. Chen. When all passengers have deplaned, I'd like to speak with the captain and Ms. Walsh in the forward galley. Please arrange that." James nodded, his expression suggesting he understood the gravity of the request. "Right away, Ms. Winters." As the last passengers exited, Vivian rose and collected her carry-on from the overhead compartment. She moved to the now empty forward galley and waited, her posture straight, her expression composed but resolute. Within minutes, Captain William Pearson appeared, his gray hair and confident bearing projecting veteran status. "Ms. Winters, I'm Captain Pearson. James mentioned you wanted to speak with me." "Yes, Captain. Thank you for making yourself available." Vivian extended her hand, which he shook firmly. "Is Ms. Walsh joining us?" "She's on her way," he replied, his expression neutral, but eyes alert. "May I ask what this concerns?" "An incident of discriminatory treatment during boarding that I experienced personally," Vivian stated directly. "As CEO, I find it necessary to address this immediately rather than allowing it to be processed through normal channels, which appear to have failed repeatedly in the past." Captain Pearson's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. I wasn't aware of any incident." "Few are when they don't personally experience it," Vivian replied. Karen Walsh appeared at the galley entrance, her complexion pale, hands clasped tightly before her. James Chen stood slightly behind her, his expression suggesting he wished to be anywhere else. "Ms. Walsh," Vivian acknowledged. "Thank you for joining us." Karen nodded stiffly but remained silent. "Captain Pearson," Vivian continued, "before we deplane, I want to formally report that Ms. Walsh engaged in discriminatory behavior toward me during the boarding process. Despite my presenting a valid first-class boarding pass, she repeatedly questioned my right to be in the priority line, implied I might have obtained the ticket improperly, and only modified her behavior when informed of my position as CEO." The captain's expression grew serious. "That's a very serious allegation, Ms. Winters." "It's not an allegation. It's a first-hand account from your chief executive," Vivian corrected calmly. "And Mr. Chen can confirm the details, as can numerous passengers who witnessed the exchange." James nodded reluctantly when the captain glanced his way. "Ms. Walsh," Captain Pearson turned to the flight attendant. "What's your response to this?" Karen's voice trembled slightly. "It was a misunderstanding. I was simply following procedure to verify." "What specifically about me required verification?" "When other first-class passengers were boarded without question?" Vivian interrupted. Karen fell silent, unable or unwilling to articulate the implicit bias that had driven her actions. "Captain," Vivian continued, "I'm formally requesting that Ms. Walsh be removed from the return flight crew and that a full investigation be initiated immediately. I'll be reviewing all prior complaints against Ms. Walsh that were dismissed as misunderstandings, as well as our company's overall response to discrimination reports." Captain Pearson straightened, clearly recognizing the gravity of the situation. "Of course, Ms. Winters. I'll contact regional management immediately to arrange crew reassignment for the return flight. I've already notified HR Director Devin Carter, who will be coordinating the formal investigation," Vivian added. "I'd appreciate your full cooperation with that process, Captain." "Absolutely." Karen finally found her voice. "Ms. Winters, please. This is my livelihood. I've been with Skyline for 15 years. One mistake shouldn't—" "This wasn't one mistake," Vivian interrupted, her tone firm but not harsh. "According to preliminary information, this is part of a pattern that has been reported and ignored multiple times. That stops today. I have a mortgage, a family. So do the countless passengers who have been humiliated, questioned, and made to feel unwelcome on our airline because of what they look like, Vivian met Karen's gaze directly. Actions have consequences, Ms. Walsh. Today you're experiencing them rather than being shielded from them. A knock on the aircraft door interrupted the tense exchange. A woman in a skyline management uniform entered, her expression professionally neutral despite the obvious tension in the galley. Ms. Winters, I'm Patricia Hartman, Regional Manager for San Francisco. Captain Pearson just contacted me about an urgent situation. Ms. Hartman, thank you for responding so quickly. Vivian extended her hand. I've just informed Captain Pearson and Ms. Walsh that I experienced discriminatory treatment during boarding and am requesting immediate action. Patricia's expression remained carefully controlled, though her eyes darted briefly to Karen. Of course, Ms. Winters. If you'll come with me to our administrative offices, we can discuss this privately and take your formal statement. That won't be necessary. I've already documented the incident comprehensively and sent it to HR Director Carter, Vivian replied. What is necessary is ensuring Ms. Walsh is removed from the return flight crew and that a formal investigation begins immediately. Patricia nodded, clearly recognizing that this was not a situation where standard corporate deflection tactics would work. I'll arrange the crew change immediately. Ms. Walsh, please collect your belongings and report to my office. Karen's face had lost all color. This is completely disproportionate. I've given this company 15 years of service. And in those 15 years, how many passengers have experienced what I did today? Vivian asked. The difference is, they didn't have the authority to demand accountability. I do. With that, Vivian collected her carry-on and nodded to Captain Pearson. Thank you for your cooperation, Captain. I trust you'll provide a full statement to the investigation team. Of course, Ms. Winters. As Vivian exited the aircraft, into the jet bridge, she could feel Karen Walsh's eyes on her back. The weight of authority sat differently on her shoulders now, not just the responsibility to deliver shareholder value or negotiate successful mergers, but the power to reshape the culture of an entire organization. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call from Devin Carter. The real work was just beginning. The sleek black town car glided through San Francisco's morning traffic, carrying Vivian from the airport toward the Four Seasons Hotel. Through the tinted windows, she watched fog roll over the city's iconic hills, the misty landscape matching her contemplative mood. The hotel is 20 minutes away, Ms. Winters, the driver informed her. Traffic's lighter than usual this morning. Vivian nodded acknowledgement before returning to her phone call with Devin Carter, Skyline's HR director. She had placed the call on speaker while reviewing documents on her tablet. I've pulled Walsh's complete file, Devin was saying, his deep voice clear through the car's premium sound system. And honestly, Vivian, it's worse than I initially thought. Tell me, Vivian replied, scrolling through the preliminary report he'd sent. 7 formal complaints over the past 5 years, all from passengers of color who were questioned about their first-class tickets or elite status. Every single case was dismissed by mid-level management as a misunderstanding or procedure adherence. No disciplinary action taken, not even a notation in her file. Vivian's mouth tightened. Who handled these complaints? Regional Customer Service Manager Timothy Brooks in 4 cases, and his predecessor Janet Miller in the others. Both report to Senior VP of Customer Experience Michael Dawson. Dawson reports directly to Thomas Reynolds, Vivian noted, the connection becoming clear. Thomas Reynolds, the board member who had suggested accompanying her to the merger negotiations, oversaw the Customer Experience Division before joining the board 3 years ago. He'd personally selected Dawson as his replacement. Exactly, Devin confirmed. And here's where it gets interesting. I started digging into our complaint resolution metrics, and there's a clear pattern of racial disparity. White passengers' complaints about service issues have an 83% resolution rate with compensation offered. For passengers of color with identical complaints, that drops to 37%. Vivian wasn't surprised, but the statistical confirmation still sent a wave of cold anger through her. This isn't just about Karen Walsh. No, Devin agreed. She's a symptom of a systemic problem, and based on what I'm seeing, it's being actively protected by people with significant influence in the company. The town car stopped at a traffic light. and Vivian watched a diverse group of pedestrians crossing the street. Business people, tourists, locals, all coexisting in the cosmopolitan city. This was Skyline's customer base, all of them, not just those who fit Karen Walsh's mental image of a first-class passenger. "Devon, I need everything," Vivian said decisively. "Full audit of discrimination complaints across all divisions for the past 5 years. Statistical analysis of resolution rates broken down by passenger demographics. Internal communication records between Brooks, Miller, Dawson, and Reynolds regarding these complaints. And I want our diversity metrics for customer-facing positions, especially in premium services." "That's going to ruffle some serious feathers, Vivian," Devon cautioned, though she could hear the approval in his voice. At 45, Devon Carter had spent his career trying to make corporations live up to their diversity statements. In Vivian, he'd finally found a CEO willing to move beyond lip service. "I'm not interested in feather maintenance," Vivian replied. "I'm interested in accountability and structural change. How quickly can you compile this information?" "Most of it by end of day. The communications records will take longer since we'll need IT involvement and possibly legal oversight." "Involve? Legal immediately, but be selective about who you bring in. We need people without connections to Reynolds or his allies." "I'll work with Sophia in legal. She's solid." "What about Patricia Hartman in San Francisco? Can she be trusted with this?" Vivian considered the regional manager's carefully neutral response at the plane. "Unknown. Proceed with caution there. Have her implement the necessary actions regarding Walsh, but don't share the broader investigation yet." The town car pulled up to the hotel entrance, where a uniformed doorman approached to assist with luggage. "I need to go," Vivian told Devon. "I want a secure video conference at 4 o'clock Pacific time to review what you found. And Devon, this stays between us, Sophia, and whoever else is absolutely necessary until we have a complete picture." "Understood. And Vivian, thank you for doing this. Most executives would have just accepted the apology and moved on." "That's exactly why the problem persists," Vivian replied. "I'll talk to you at 4. She ended the call as the driver opened her door. The doorman welcomed her to the Four Seasons, and the front desk staff greeted her by name as she approached. The VIP treatment automatically accorded to the CEO of a major corporation. No questions asked about whether she belonged there. After checking in, Vivian declined assistance with her luggage and made her way to the elevator. Her corner suite offered panoramic views of the city, but she spared only a glance for the scenery before setting up her mobile workstation at the desk. The merger negotiations weren't scheduled until tomorrow, giving her unexpected time to address the Walsh situation and its broader implications. Rather than feeling distracted from her primary mission, Vivian recognized that these issues were inextricably linked. A company culture that tolerated discrimination against passengers would inevitably suffer in customer satisfaction, employee retention, and ultimately, shareholder value. Vivian began methodically researching Karen Walsh's employment history, using her executive access to personnel records. Walsh had joined Skyline 15 years ago after 4 years at Continental Airlines. Her performance reviews showed consistent technical competence, but occasional customer communication issues, a euphemism that took on new meaning in light of the pattern of complaints. More telling were the performance reviews Walsh hadn't received. Company policy mandated documentation of all passenger complaints in annual evaluations, yet none of the 7 formal discrimination complaints appeared in Walsh's records. Someone had deliberately kept them out of her file. Vivian moved on to Timothy Brooks, the regional manager who had dismissed 4 complaints against Walsh. His promotion history showed rapid advancement during Reynolds' tenure as SVP of Customer Experience, despite mediocre performance metrics. His personnel file included numerous notes from Reynolds praising his pragmatic approach to customer issues and protection of employee morale. In corporate doublespeak, Vivian recognized code for prioritizing employees over customers, particularly when those customers belonged to marginalized groups. A text message interrupted her research. "Ms. Winters, this is Patricia Hartman. I wanted to inform you that Karen Walsh has been removed from all flight duties pending investigation, and I've taken her preliminary statement regarding today's incident. How would you like to proceed?" Vivian considered her response carefully. Without knowing Hartman's allegiances, she needed to be strategic. Thank you for handling this promptly, Ms. Hartman. Please forward Ms. Walsh's statement to HR Director Devin Carter, who will be managing the formal investigation from headquarters. No further action needed from your office at this time. This would keep Hartman informed of the immediate issue without revealing the broader investigation. If she was part of the problem, she'd have minimal opportunity to interfere. If she was a potential ally, she'd be brought in when appropriate. A calendar notification reminded Vivian of her upcoming lunch with Jason Chen, Pacific West Airlines, Chief Operating Officer. The preliminary meeting before tomorrow's formal negotiations had been scheduled weeks ago, a chance for the two executives to establish rapport before diving into the complex details of the proposed merger. Vivian changed into her burgundy Chanel suit, refreshed her makeup, and gathered her materials. Despite the morning's events, she remained focused on the merger's strategic importance. Pacific West's West Coast routes perfectly complemented Skyline's East Coast and Midwest strength. The combined entity would create a formidable competitor to the industry's largest players while generating substantial cost synergies. As she prepared to leave for lunch, her phone rang. Devin Carter again. "I found something you need to see immediately," he said without preamble. Thomas Reynolds personally intervened in a 2022 investigation into discriminatory practices among first-class cabin crews. The internal report never made it to the previous CEO. Vivian paused at the door. "What kind of intervention?" He shut it down. Completely. The investigator was reassigned to a regional office in Omaha, and the report was buried under IT security protocols that required board-level clearance to access. "How did you find it?" Sophia in legal remembered rumors about the investigation and helped me locate the buried files. Vivian, the report documented a widespread pattern exactly like what you experienced. First-class passengers of color being questioned, challenged, or provided inferior service compared to white passengers. It identified 15 flight attendants, with multiple complaints, including Karen Walsh. Vivian processed this information, its implications expanding like ripples in a pond. This isn't just negligence, it's active suppression. Exactly. And Reynolds has been protecting these employees for years. The question is why? Find out, Vivian instructed. And Devin, secure those files immediately. Make multiple backups on separate systems. If Reynolds buried this once, he might try again. Already done. Sophia suggested we should brief the board chair about this before Reynolds gets wind of the new investigation. Vivian considered this advice. Lawrence Chen, the board chairman, had supported her CEO appointment despite Reynolds' objection. He was a strategic thinker who valued the company's long-term reputation. He would understand the liability these practices created. Not yet, Vivian decided. We need more evidence first. Reynolds has allies on the board. If he learns we're investigating, documents might disappear and witnesses could be pressured. Let's build our case before we escalate. Understood. I'll keep digging and update you at 4. Vivian ended the call and took a moment to center herself. The morning's incident had unexpectedly opened a door into what appeared to be systemic corruption within Skyline's leadership. As disturbing as the discovery was, it also presented an opportunity to address deep-rooted problems that had likely been festering for years. She left her hotel room with renewed purpose. The Pacific West merger remained critical, but now she had an equally important mission: cleaning house at Skyline Aviation, starting with those who believed discrimination was acceptable business practice. As her second town car of the day navigated toward the upscale restaurant where she would meet Jason Chen, Vivian mentally revised her strategy. The morning's confrontation with Karen Walsh had been a catalyst, but the real battle would be with Thomas Reynolds and his network of enablers. For that fight, she would need irrefutable evidence, strategic allies, and perfect timing. Her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Winters, this is James Chen from this morning's flight. I heard about the investigation and wanted you to know I'm willing to provide a statement about what I've witnessed over the years. There are others who will speak up too, if they know they'll be protected." Vivian smiled for the first time since boarding that morning's flight. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. HR Director Devin Carter will contact you securely. Your willingness to speak up is exactly what Skyline needs right now." She put her phone away as the car approached the restaurant. One confrontation had led to a much larger challenge, but also to unexpected allies. The strategy was taking shape. Now she needed to execute it flawlessly. Sunlight glinted off the bay as Vivian's town car pulled up to the waterfront, one of San Francisco's premier restaurants. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Golden Gate Bridge, providing a suitably impressive backdrop for her lunch with Pacific West's COO. As she entered the restaurant, heads turned subtly. Vivian was accustomed to the attention, partly due to her striking appearance in the burgundy Chanel suit, partly because powerful black women in corporate America remained uncommon enough to draw notice. The maitre d' approached immediately. "Ms. Winters, welcome to the waterfront. Mr. Chen is already seated. Please follow me." Jason Chen rose as Vivian approached the window table. At 48, the Pacific West COO had salt and pepper hair and the trim build of someone who prioritized fitness despite a demanding schedule. "Ms. Winters," he greeted her with a firm handshake. "It's a pleasure to finally meet in person." "Likewise, Mr. Chen. And please, call me Vivian." "Jason, then." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I took the liberty of ordering champagne. I understand congratulations are in order. 6 months as CEO and already 2 record quarters." The waiter appeared with a bottle of Dom Perignon, pouring 2 flutes with practiced elegance. "Thank you," Vivian replied, taking a small sip. "Though I prefer to measure success in more than quarterly results, such as long-term sustainability, employee satisfaction, customer loyalty, the metrics that build lasting value rather than temporary stock bumps." Jason nodded appreciatively. "Refreshing perspective. Most CEOs I meet can only talk about next quarter's projections." "I'm not most CEOs," Vivian said with a slight smile. "Clearly." Jason raised his glass in acknowledgement to new partnerships and shared visions. They clinked glasses, and the conversation shifted to industry trends, fleet modernization strategies, and the complementary route structures that made their potential merger so attractive to both companies. Vivian found Jason thoughtful and strategic, genuinely interested in the synergies between their operations rather than simply acquiring market share. As their main courses arrived, Jason leaned forward slightly. "Off the record, Vivian, why this merger? Why now? Skyline has momentum. You could continue independently for years." Vivian considered her response. "Scale matters in our industry. Combined, we'd have the network to compete with the largest carriers while maintaining the service quality that distinguishes both our brands. Together, we create something greater than either company could achieve alone." Eloquently put. Jason took a bite of his salmon. "Though I've heard rumors that certain members of your board prefer acquisition over merger." This confirmed Vivian's suspicion that Thomas Reynolds had been communicating with Pacific West behind her back. "Some board members have traditional perspectives," she acknowledged carefully. "But the executive team and majority board position support a true merger of equals. That's the only deal I'm authorized to negotiate." Jason seemed satisfied with this answer, and they spent the remainder of lunch discussing integration challenges and opportunities. By the time dessert arrived, Vivian felt confident that their corporate cultures could indeed mesh successfully, with the right leadership and vision. As they prepared to leave, Jason mentioned, "My team has prepared detailed facility tours for tomorrow morning before the formal negotiations. Our headquarters, primary maintenance facility, and operations center." "I look forward to it," Vivian replied, "though I'll need to adjust my schedule slightly. An urgent internal matter requires my attention this afternoon." Jason raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. They parted with another handshake and mutual expressions of optimism about the following day's discussions. In the town car returning to her hotel, Vivian received a text from Devin. "Urgent update before our call. Reynolds just contacted IT security asking about access logs to the 2022 investigation files. Someone tipped him off." Vivian frowned. The timeline had just accelerated. "Move up our call to 2 p.m. and find out who's feeding information to Reynolds." Back at the hotel, Vivian changed into more comfortable attire and set up her laptop for the video conference. At precisely 2 o'clock, Devin's face appeared on screen, along with Sophia Lee, the associate general counsel Vivian had worked with on several previous matters. "Thank you both for making yourselves available earlier than planned," Vivian began. "Devin, what prompted Reynolds' sudden interest in those files?" Devin ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. "Unknown. But Patricia Hartman placed a call to Michael Dawson immediately after taking Walsh's statement. Dawson and Reynolds spoke shortly thereafter." "So Hartman is connected to their network," Vivian noted, filing this information away. "What else have you found?" Sophia spoke up, her expression serious. "The 2022 investigation was more comprehensive than we initially realized. It documented a pattern of discriminatory practices in first-class service, lounge access, and upgrade processing. The investigator, Robert Taylor, identified what he called an unofficial policy of subjecting non-white passengers to additional scrutiny." "And Reynolds buried this completely?" Vivian asked. "Worse," Sophia continued. "He actively discredited Taylor, suggesting he had a personal agenda. Taylor was transferred to Omaha and eventually left the company." "I've located Taylor," Devin added. "He's willing to speak with us confidentially. Says he has additional documentation that he secured before leaving Skyline." Vivian nodded. "Arrange that immediately. What about the current situation with Walsh?" "She's retained legal counsel," Devin reported. "Her attorney contacted HR claiming she's being singled out for standard procedure and suggesting potential counteraction for defamation." "Empty threat," Sophia interjected. "We have multiple witnesses and a clear pattern of behavior, but it suggests she's receiving guidance from someone with resources." "Reynolds," Vivian concluded. "He's trying to contain this before it exposes his role in suppressing the previous investigation." Devin nodded. "That's our assessment as well. And there's more. I've compiled statistics on passenger complaints by demographic across all divisions. The disparity is significant enough to present legal liability under multiple anti-discrimination statutes." Sophia grimaced. If this became public through litigation, the reputational damage would be substantial. Shareholders could argue that leadership knowingly allowed discriminatory practices to continue despite documented evidence. "Which brings us to the core question," Devin said. "How do we proceed? Reynolds has significant board support and a network throughout middle management. Taking him on directly could get messy." Vivian considered their options, weighing risk against necessity. "We need to act decisively before Reynolds can mobilize his allies or bury more evidence. Sophia, prepare a formal briefing for the board. Chairman. Devin, continue gathering statements from employees willing to testify about the pattern of discrimination. I'll handle Reynolds personally." "How?" Devin asked cautiously. "By giving him the opportunity to underestimate me," Vivian replied. Again. She outlined her strategy, refining details based on Sophia and Devin's input. By the time the call ended an hour later, they had a clear action plan with contingencies for various scenarios. Vivian's phone rang almost immediately after she disconnected from the video conference. The screen displayed William Pearson, Captain. "Captain Pearson," she answered. "What can I do for you?" "Ms. Winters, I apologize for contacting you directly," the captain began, his tone professional but urgent. "I've just received a concerning call from Senior VP Dawson questioning my account of this morning's incident and suggesting I reconsider certain details before submitting my formal statement." Vivian's grip tightened on the phone. "Are you saying a senior executive attempted to influence your testimony, Captain Pearson?" "He didn't explicitly say to change my statement, but the implication was clear. He mentioned my retirement is coming, up in 18 months, and that the company values team players when considering extended contracts for senior captains. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Captain. Would you be willing to document this conversation as part of our IWE investigation?" "That's why I called you directly," Pearson confirmed. "This crosses a line I'm not comfortable with. I've been with Skyline for 27 years. I've seen management changes, mergers, bankruptcies, and reorganizations, but I've never been asked to compromise my professional integrity. I assure you, Captain Pearson, this behavior is not condoned under my leadership. Please send your account of both the original incident and this subsequent pressure to HR Director Devin Carter. He'll ensure it's handled appropriately and confidentially." After ending the call, Vivian checked the time. Nearly 4 o'clock. She had just enough time to implement the next phase of her strategy before the evening's business dinner with Pacific West's executive team. She placed a call to Lawrence Chen, Skyline's board chairman. "Vivian," he answered on the second ring. "This is unexpected. How are the preliminary discussions going?" "Productively," she replied. "But I'm calling about another matter that requires your immediate attention as board chair." She briefed him concisely on the morning's incident, the pattern of discrimination uncovered in their preliminary investigation, and Reynolds' role in suppressing the 2022 report. Chen listened without interruption, then said, "These are serious allegations, particularly regarding a board member. Do you have documentation?" "Substantial and growing. Sophia Lee is preparing a comprehensive briefing for you. But there's an urgent aspect that can't wait for formal board processes. Go on." Reynolds appears to be actively interfering with the current investigation, potentially violating multiple corporate governance protocols and possibly federal anti-discrimination laws. "As CEO, I'm initiating a formal internal investigation, but I need your authorization as board chair to suspend Reynolds' access to company systems and records until the investigation concludes." Chen was silent for several seconds. "Thomas has significant allies on the board, Vivian. This could create division at a critical time for the merger negotiations. With respect, Chairman, allowing a board member to obstruct an investigation into discriminatory practices presents a far greater risk to the merger and to shareholder value. Pacific West could walk away if they discover we've been concealing potential liability." Another pause. "You're certain of your evidence?" "Certain enough to stake my position on it," Vivian confirmed. "Very well. You have my authorization to suspend Reynolds' system access pending investigation. I'll sign the formal directive within the hour." "But Vivian, this path you're taking has no room for error." "I understand the stakes completely, Chairman. Thank you for your support." The next call went to Skyline's Chief Information Officer. "Frank, I need an urgent security protocol implemented. Board Chairman Chen is sending formal authorization momentarily, but time is critical." With Reynolds' digital access suspended, Vivian made one final call to Patricia Hartman in the San Francisco regional office. "Ms. Hartman, this is CEO Winters," she began when the regional manager answered. "I understand you spoke with SVP Dawson regarding Flight Attendant Walsh's situation." Hartman's voice betrayed her surprise. "Yes, I provided a standard update to senior management as per protocol." "And did that standard update include information about Captain Pearson being pressured to alter his statement?" Silence. "Ms. Hartman, I'm offering you one opportunity to realign your loyalties appropriately. You can either be part of the solution to the discriminatory practices we're addressing, or you can be removed along with those who facilitated them. Which will it be?" Hartman cleared her throat. I was following established channels, Ms. Winters, but I see now that was a mistake. What would you like me to do?" "Document every communication you've had with Dawson, Reynolds, or anyone else regarding this incident. Send it directly to HR Director Carter within the hour. Then continue managing Walsh's case exactly according to company policy. No preferential treatment, no procedural shortcuts." "Understood, Ms. Winters. And thank you for the opportunity to correct my approach." After ending the call, Vivian stood by the hotel window, watching the afternoon fog roll in across the bay. Within hours, she had transformed a personal incident of discrimination into a company-wide reckoning. Reynolds and his allies would soon discover they had severely underestimated both her resolve and her strategic capabilities. Her phone vibrated with a text from Devon. "Reynolds just tried accessing the investigation files and was denied. He's called an emergency meeting with his board allies for 7 p.m. Eastern." Vivian checked her watch. That gave her 3 hours before Reynolds made his countermove. She sent a quick reply. "Proceed as planned. I'll handle the Pacific West dinner and be ready for Reynolds afterward." She changed into her evening attire, an elegant black Prada ensemble that projected confidence and authority, and gathered her materials for dinner. As she left her room, she felt a curious sense of calm. The confrontation with Karen Walsh had been merely the first domino. Now the entire row was falling, exposing years of systematic discrimination that had been protected by those in power. By the time she returned from San Francisco, Skyline Aviation would be irrevocably changed, and those who thought a black woman didn't belong in first class or in the CEO's office were about to learn a powerful lesson about the consequences of underestimation. The private dining room at Accarello hummed with conversation as executives from Skyline and Pacific West discussed potential synergies over Northern Italian cuisine. Vivian maintained her focus on the merger discussions despite the parallel crisis unfolding across the country, where Thomas Reynolds was undoubtedly rallying his allies against her. Jason Chen raised his wine glass to Vivian's vision of a true merger of equals. I must admit, when our board first considered this partnership, some were skeptical that Skyline's new CEO would pursue such an equitable approach. Rather than a traditional acquisition, you mean? Vivian smiled diplomatically. Skyline's strength isn't just in our roots or fleet, but in our people and culture, or at least in the culture we're building. She emphasized the last words subtly. Pacific West's CEO, Richard Torres, leaned forward with interest. That sounds like a leader in the midst of transformation. Care to elaborate? Before Vivian could respond, her phone vibrated with an urgent message. She glanced down discreetly. Reynolds called emergency board meeting for 9 p.m. Eastern. Claims you've exceeded authority and demands vote to suspend your actions pending review. Chairman Chen requesting your availability after your dinner. Devon? Vivian maintained her composed expression. Every organization has legacy systems and attitudes that occasionally need reevaluation, Mr. Torres. I believe in addressing problems directly, rather than allowing them to undermine our potential. Admirable, Torres nodded, though change often faces resistance. Indeed it does, Vivian agreed, silently calculating the timing. Reynolds had escalated faster than anticipated, but Chairman Chen's willingness to hear her side suggested the board wasn't uniformly aligned with Reynolds yet. The dinner continued, with conversation flowing between route integration possibilities and fleet standardization benefits. Vivian participated fully while monitoring messages from Devon about developments in Atlanta. At 9:45, as dessert was being served, she received the message she'd been expecting. Emergency board meeting in progress. Reynolds presenting case against you. 6 board members present. Chen delaying vote until hearing from you. Can you call in at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific? Devon. Vivian excused herself momentarily, stepped into the restaurant's quiet lobby, and called Devon directly. What exactly is Reynolds claiming? She asked without preamble. That you've launched a vendetta based on a personal incident, suspended a board member's access without proper authority, and are damaging company morale and operations before a critical merger, Devon summarized. He's portraying this as an emotional overreaction rather than a legitimate investigation. Of course he is, Vivian said, recognizing the classic tactic used against women executives, particularly black women, when they exercised authority. And his evidence? Mostly innuendo and procedural objections, but he has Dawson and 2 other VPs backing his claims that the discrimination allegations are exaggerated and that your response is disproportionate. Who's present at the meeting? Reynolds and his 5 closest allies on the board plus Chen. The other 5 members weren't contacted. A deliberately unbalanced emergency meeting. Another predictable move. Has Sophia shared the documentation with Chen? Yes, just before the meeting started. He's reviewed it but is playing his cards close. He's giving Reynolds plenty of rope while waiting for you to call in. Perfect. Have Sophia send the full documentation package to all board members immediately, including those not at the meeting. I want everyone to have the evidence before I join the call. Already done, Devon confirmed. Anything else you need for the call? Have you ever watched someone try to tear down someone else just because they stood up for what's right? Comment number 1 if you think Vivian should fight back against Reynolds and his allies. Or number 2, if you think she should try a more diplomatic approach. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to see how this power struggle plays out. But seriously, how far would you go to challenge discrimination if you had the power Vivian has? Would you risk your career to make lasting change? Yes, Vivian said after a moment's thought. Contact Captain Pearson. Ask if he's willing to join the call to personally testify about Dawson's attempt to pressure him, and have James Chen available. as well to confirm the pattern of discrimination he witnessed. I'll try, but it's short notice. Offer them my personal assurance that they'll be protected from retaliation, regardless of the outcome. After ending the call, Vivian returned to the private dining room, where conversation had shifted to marketing strategies for the combined airline. "Sorry for the interruption," she said smoothly. "An urgent matter at headquarters requires my attention at 7. Would it be possible to expedite dessert and coffee?" The Pacific West executives were understanding, and by 6:50, Vivian had said her goodbyes and was in a private room the restaurant had provided for her call. She connected to the board meeting precisely at 7 o'clock Pacific time. The video conference screen showed the boardroom in Atlanta, where Thomas Reynolds stood at the head of the table mid-sentence. He faltered momentarily upon seeing Vivian join the call. "Ah, Ms. Winters has found time in her schedule to join us," he said, his tone suggesting her absence had been deliberate rather than due to the time difference and her merger responsibilities. "Good evening, gentlemen," Vivian replied calmly. "Thank you, Chairman Chen, for accommodating my schedule. Given the 3-hour time difference and my ongoing merger discussions with Pacific West," Lawrence Chen nodded from the other end of the table. "Of course, Vivian. Thomas was just expressing his concerns about recent events. Perhaps you'd like to respond before we consider any action." Reynolds straightened his tie, a unconscious tell of his discomfort. "Before Ms. Winters speaks, I want to emphasize that this isn't personal. We all support diversity and appropriate workplace standards. My concern is solely about process and proportionality in response to what was essentially a minor customer service misunderstanding." Vivian noted his careful framing, positioning himself as reasonable while minimizing the discrimination, as a misunderstanding. Classic deflection. "I appreciate the opportunity to address the board," Vivian began. "What occurred this morning was not a misunderstanding, but a clear instance of racial discrimination that I experienced personally. However, that incident merely opened the door to discovering a pattern of similar discrimination that has been systematically hidden from executive leadership and the board." She outlined the morning's events, the subsequent discovery of Karen Walsh's history of similar complaints, and the 2022 investigation that Reynolds had buried. "Most disturbing," she continued, "is the evidence that board member Reynolds not only concealed a formal investigation into discriminatory practices, but may have actively protected employees engaged in such behavior and punished those who attempted to address it." Reynolds interrupted, his composure slipping. "These are outrageous accusations. The 2022 review was an overzealous witch hunt based on anecdotal complaints. I didn't bury anything. I prevented a flawed investigation from damaging employee morale and creating unnecessary liability." "Unnecessary liability," Vivian repeated. "Mr. Reynolds, discriminating against passengers based on race creates substantial liability, both legal and reputational. Addressing it reduces liability." "This is exactly what concerns me," Reynolds countered. "You're making sweeping claims about systemic issues based on one personal incident that may have been simple miscommunication." Chairman Chen intervened. "The documentation Sophia Lee provided suggests otherwise, Thomas. There appears to be statistical evidence of a pattern, not just isolated incidents." Reynolds waved dismissively. "Statistics can be manipulated to suggest anything. The real issue here is process. Ms. Winters suspended my system access without proper board approval and launched an invasive investigation that's disrupting operations during critical merger negotiations. Actually," Chen corrected, "Ms. Winters requested and received my authorization as board chair for the temporary security measure, which is within both her authority and mine when investigating potential governance violations." Reynolds hadn't expected this support from Chen. He shifted tactics. "Even if technically authorized, these actions are disproportionate and appear driven by personal animus rather than objective leadership. Ms. Winters experienced an unfortunate interaction and is now using her position to wage a crusade that could damage our company at a pivotal moment." This was the attack Vivian had anticipated, painting her as emotional and vindictive rather than strategic and principled. Before she could respond, her phone indicated another participant was joining the call. "Excuse me," said a new voice. "This is Captain William Pearson. I understand the board is discussing this morning's incident and subsequent events. Reynolds looked genuinely startled. Captain Pearson? This is a closed board meeting. How did you… I invited him, Vivian said calmly. Captain Pearson has relevant testimony regarding attempts to interfere with the investigation. Chen nodded. Go ahead, Captain. What can you tell us? Pearson described the incident he had witnessed on the plane, and then detailed Michael Dawson's subsequent attempt to pressure him into altering his statement, including the veiled threat regarding his contract extension. I've been with Skyline for 27 years, Pearson concluded. I've never been asked to compromise my professional integrity like this before. The boardroom fell silent. Reynolds finally spoke, his tone now conciliatory. If SVP Dawson made such comments, that's certainly inappropriate and will be addressed. But that's a separate issue from Ms. Winter's overreaction to her personal experience. Is it separate? Vivian questioned. Or is it part of a pattern where discrimination is minimized and those who report it face pressure or retaliation? Another participant joined the call, James Chen, the flight attendant from that morning's flight. Mr. Chen has worked in our first-class cabin for 8 years, Vivian introduced him. He has direct knowledge of the practices we're discussing. James looked nervous but determined. Board members, I've witnessed Flight Attendant Walsh and others routinely subject passengers of color to additional scrutiny regarding their first-class status. It's an unwritten but understood practice among certain senior crew members. Those of us who object are assigned less desirable routes or shifts. And did you report this behavior? Chairman Chen asked. Twice officially, and several times to immediate supervisors, James confirmed. The official reports disappeared into the system with no outcome. The informal reports were dismissed as being too sensitive or told to focus on more important issues. Reynolds attempted to regain control. These are serious allegations that should be properly investigated through established channels, not in an emergency board meeting. I move that we suspend this irregular process and refer the matter to the Ethics Committee for standard review. Vivian recognized the tactic, bureaucratic burial through committee processes that Reynolds likely influenced. Before voting on that motion, she countered, the board should know that we've uncovered documentation showing Mr. Reynolds personally intervened to halt a similar investigation in 2022, reassigned the investigator to a remote office, and implemented security protocols to prevent the findings from reaching the then CEO or board. She shared her screen, displaying the document trail Sophia had uncovered. This isn't about one incident or one employee. It's about a systematic effort to conceal discriminatory practices and protect those engaged in them. The question is whether this board will address it now or wait until it becomes a public relations crisis or legal action. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted palpably. Even Reynolds' allies looked uncomfortable as they reviewed the evidence on their tablets. Chairman Chen broke the silence. Thomas, these documents appear to show your direct involvement in suppressing evidence of discrimination within our company. Do you deny their authenticity? Reynolds' confidence faltered visibly. These actions were taken to protect the company from unfounded accusations and the reputational risk of overreaction. The 2022 review was based on anecdotal complaints, not hard evidence. Statistical analysis of complaint resolution rates broken down by passenger demographics isn't anecdotal, Vivian countered, nor are 7 formal complaints against a single flight attendant, all from passengers of color, all dismissed without action. One of the board members who had initially seemed aligned with Reynolds spoke up. Thomas, if these documents are authentic, this creates significant liability exposure for Skyline. As a director, I'm concerned about potential shareholder action if it became public that we knowingly concealed discriminatory practices. Exactly my concern, another director agreed. The merger with Pacific West could be jeopardized if this information emerged during due diligence without us having taken corrective action. Reynolds sensed his support eroding. I maintain that Ms. Winters has handled this inappropriately. A measured, confidential investigation through proper channels would address any legitimate concerns without creating internal division or external exposure. That approach was attempted in 2022, Vivian reminded them. The investigator was Reassigned, the report buried, and the discrimination continued, as I experienced firsthand this morning. The proper channels Mr. Reynolds refers to have been compromised. Chairman Chen studied the documentation on his tablet, his expression grave. I've heard enough to conclude that Ms. Winter's actions were justified given the circumstances. I propose we formally authorize the investigation to continue under HR Director Carter's supervision, with results to be presented to the full board within 2 weeks. Reynolds made one final attempt. At minimum, Ms. Winters should recuse herself from the investigation since she's personally involved in the triggering incident. This creates an obvious conflict of interest. On the contrary, Chen replied, Ms. Winters' personal experience provided visibility into an issue that might otherwise have remained concealed. However, to ensure objectivity, I'll personally oversee the investigation alongside Mr. Carter. He looked around the table. Unless there are objections, that's how we'll proceed. The directors who had arrived as Reynolds' allies now sat silently, unwilling to publicly oppose an investigation into discrimination after seeing the evidence. Reynolds himself appeared stunned by the rapid collapse of his position. One more thing, Vivian added. During this investigation, it's crucial that witnesses feel safe from retaliation. I request formal board protection for Captain Pearson, Mr. Chen, and anyone else who comes forward with relevant information. Agreed, Chen said immediately. No employee will face negative consequences for truthful testimony. Does anyone oppose this protection? The silence was telling. Very well. The investigation will proceed with witness protection guaranteed. Thomas, your system access will remain suspended until the investigation concludes. Reynolds' face flushed with anger. This is a railroading. You'll regret treating a 20-year company veteran this way. No one is questioning your years of service, Thomas, Chen replied evenly. Only specific actions related to discrimination complaints. If the investigation clears you, your access and authority will be fully restored. With the immediate crisis addressed, Vivian returned to her central purpose. Chairman Chen, I appreciate the board's support for this necessary investigation. I want to assure everyone that these matters won't distract from the Pacific West merger negotiations, which remain on track and positive. Chen nodded. Thank you, Vivian. Please keep me updated on both fronts. This meeting is adjourned. As the video conference ended, Vivian exhaled slowly. The confrontation had gone as well as she could have hoped, but Reynolds wouldn't surrender easily. His decades at Skyline had surely given him contingency plans and hidden allies. The battle had been won, but the war for Skyline's culture was just beginning. Her phone buzzed with a message from Devon. Reynolds left the boardroom looking like thunder. Dawson and 2 other executives were waiting outside. They went straight to Reynolds' office and closed the door. What's our next move? Vivian typed her response. Secure all evidence immediately. Anticipate electronic document deletion. Attempts. Monitor communications between Reynolds, Dawson, and known allies, legally through corporate channels only, and start interviewing frontline employees about discrimination experiences. The more witnesses we have, the stronger our position. She gathered her materials and left the private room, nodding thanks to the restaurant staff as she departed. Her town car waited outside, ready to return her to the hotel. Tomorrow's merger negotiations would require her full attention and energy, but tonight had been a crucial turning point in addressing the cancer of discrimination within Skyline. As the car navigated San Francisco's hilly streets, Vivian received another message, this one from an unknown number. Ms. Winters, this is Robert Taylor, the investigator who was reassigned after the 2022 discrimination review. Devon Carter said you're finally addressing what Reynolds buried. I have documentation they don't know about. Ready to help when you are. Vivian smiled. Reynolds had created enemies in his efforts to suppress the truth. Now those enemies were becoming her allies, forming a coalition for change that grew stronger by the hour. Back at her hotel, Vivian found a message waiting from Jason Chen, Pacific West's COO. Heard rumors of board drama at Skyline. Everything okay with the merger? Available to talk if needed. Word traveled fast in the airline industry. Vivian called Jason immediately. Thanks for your concern, she said when he answered. There's an internal matter being addressed, but it won't affect our negotiations or the merger potential. Anything we should be aware of as potential partners? Jason asked carefully. Vivian considered her response. Transparency would serve her better than attempted concealment, especially since rumors were already circulating. We're addressing some customer service inconsistencies that came to light recently, she explained. Specifically, ensuring that all passengers receive the same high-quality experience regardless of their background. I believe in fixing problems rather than hiding them. Admirable, Jason replied, though she detected a note of concern. Any significant liability issues we should know about? We're conducting a thorough investigation and will implement appropriate changes. I'd be happy to brief your team on our findings and remediation plan as part of our due diligence exchange. This seemed to reassure him. I appreciate the candor, Vivian. Looking forward to tomorrow's facility tour and negotiations. After ending the call, Vivian changed into comfortable clothes and reviewed her presentation for tomorrow's merger discussion. Despite the dramatic events of the day, she remained focused on Skyline's strategic future. A future that would now include accountability and equal treatment as non-negotiable values. Her phone buzzed with yet another message, this one from Patricia Hartman. Ms. Winters, I've submitted all communications as requested. I want you to know that while I reported to Dawson, I never personally endorsed discriminatory practices. I'm willing to provide testimony about directives I received regarding complaint handling. Another potential ally emerging from the shadows. Vivian replied, Thank you, Ms. Hartman. Devin Carter will contact you to schedule a confidential interview. As midnight approached, Vivian received a final update from Devin. Security monitoring detected attempts to access and delete emails related to the 2022 investigation from Dawson's account. IT blocked the attempts and preserved the evidence. Reynolds has called an off-site meeting with his allies for 7 a.m. Eastern. We're monitoring through official channels. The resistance was organizing, just as she'd expected. Reynolds wouldn't surrender his power or admit his misconduct without a fight, but he was now playing defense rather than offense, reacting to her moves instead of controlling the narrative. Vivian sent a brief acknowledgement to Devin before preparing for bed. Tomorrow would bring both the critical merger negotiations and the next phase of the internal investigation. She needed to be at her best for both challenges. As she drifted toward sleep, Vivian reflected on how a single confrontation at an airport gate had cascaded into a company-wide reckoning with discrimination. Karen Walsh had likely never imagined that challenging a black woman's presence in the first-class line would ultimately threaten an entire power structure built on bias and exclusion. Sometimes justice required the right person to be in the wrong place at precisely the right time. Today, Vivian had been that person. Tomorrow, she would ensure that no one at Skyline ever had to experience what she and countless others had endured. The resistance to change was powerful and entrenched. But Vivian Winters was proving to be more powerful still. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Pacific West Airlines headquarters, as Vivian followed Jason Chen through the state-of-the-art operations center. Giant screens displayed real-time flight data, weather patterns, and network performance metrics, while analysts monitored systems and communicated with aircraft across the globe. Impressive facility, Vivian commented, genuinely appreciative of the operation's efficiency. Your technology integration is at least 2 years ahead of industry standards. Jason nodded with evident pride. We've prioritized infrastructure investment over fleet expansion. Better to run 100 planes perfectly than 200 planes with service issues. A philosophy I share, Vivian agreed. Quality over quantity builds lasting customer loyalty. As they continued the tour, Vivian's phone vibrated with an incoming message. She glanced at it discreetly. Reynolds convened private meeting with 5 executives and 3 board allies. Dawson actively contacting mid-level managers requesting loyalty statements. Taylor providing bombshell documentation. Need your review ASAP. Devin. Vivian maintained her engaged expression while processing this update. Reynolds was mobilizing his forces faster than anticipated. She needed to accelerate her own timeline. Jason, would you mind if we took a brief break? I need 15 minutes to address an urgent matter. Of course, he replied smoothly. The executive lounge is just down the hall. Complete privacy and excellent espresso. Shall we reconvene at 10:30 for the maintenance facility tour? Perfect. Thank you. In the elegantly appointed lounge, Vivian secured a private corner and called Devon immediately. "What has Taylor provided?" she asked without preamble. "Emails," Devon replied, his voice tense with excitement. Direct communications between Reynolds and Dawson discussing how to manage the diversity problem without changing operations. Reynolds explicitly instructed Dawson to ensure discrimination complaints never reach the CEO's desk and to protect valuable senior staff from frivolous accusations. When are these from? Ranging from 2018 through early this year. Some directly reference the 2022 investigation, with Reynolds ordering Dawson to make this go away and suggesting Taylor be neutralized through reassignment. How did Taylor obtain these? He created archives before being reassigned, anticipating potential retaliation. The emails came directly from Skyline servers through his authorized access at the time. Vivian considered the implications. These provide definitive evidence of intentional suppression. Has legal verified their authenticity? Sophia confirmed they appear genuine and contain metadata consistent with our systems. She's preparing a legal assessment of liability exposure. What about the statistical analysis of complaint handling? Complete and damning, Devon reported. First-class passengers of color were 28 times more likely to have their complaints dismissed without action compared to white passengers with identical issues. Premium cabin crews with multiple discrimination complaints received higher performance ratings and preferential assignments. Who conducted these analyses? Robert Taylor began them, and our current data team validated and expanded them using 5 years of records. And Reynolds is actively organizing resistance. Yes, he's leveraging every relationship built over 20 years. Several middle managers have reported being contacted with implied promises or threats based on their loyalty. Vivian made a quick decision. Move up our timeline. I want a company-wide communication from me by end of day, addressing the investigation directly, drafted immediately for my review, and set up a secure video conference with the full board for tomorrow morning, with all documentation distributed in advance. That's aggressive, Devon noted, though she heard approval in his voice. Reynolds won't have time to fully organize his defense. Exactly. Speed and transparency are our advantages. He operates through whispers and backroom deals. We'll use sunlight. After ending the call, Vivian spent 10 minutes reviewing the most damning emails Taylor had provided. The language was careful but unmistakable, a systematic effort to conceal discrimination and protect those who practiced it. Reynolds had created an elaborate bureaucratic shield for biased employees, all while maintaining plausible deniability. At 10:30 precisely, she rejoined Jason Chen for the remainder of the tour, her professional demeanor masking the storm of activity she had just set in motion. The maintenance facility tour and subsequent lunch proceeded smoothly, with productive discussions about fleet compatibility and operational synergies. As they walked toward the conference room for the formal negotiations, Jason asked casually, "Everything okay with your urgent matter?" "An internal situation that's being addressed promptly," Vivian replied. "Nothing that will impact our discussions." Jason nodded, though his expression suggested curiosity about the details. Airline management, always something demanding immediate attention. Indeed, though I've found that addressing issues directly rather than allowing them to fester generally yields better outcomes. The formal negotiations began at 1 o'clock, with legal and financial teams from both airlines joining the executives. For the next 4 hours, Vivian immersed herself completely in the merger discussions, setting aside the internal crisis to focus on Skyline's strategic future. By 5 o'clock, they had reached preliminary agreement on the fundamental structure. A true merger of equals with complementary leadership teams and balanced board representation. "I believe we have the framework for a historic partnership," Pacific West CEO Richard Torres concluded as they reviewed the day's progress. "Our teams will continue hammering out details, but the core vision is aligned." "Agreed," Vivian said. "This merger creates something stronger than either company could achieve alone, while preserving the best elements of both corporate cultures." As the meeting adjourned, Vivian checked her phone to find multiple updates from Devon, including a draft of the company-wide communication and notification that Taylor had provided additional documentation, internal memos showing Reynolds had established an unofficial system for flagging problematic customers who complained about discrimination, ensuring they received minimum required service on future flights. Back in her hotel room, Vivian reviewed and revised the company communication, strengthening the language and adding a personal touch. As someone who has personally experienced the discrimination we're investigating, I understand the courage required to speak up. I assure every Skyline employee that you will be protected if you come forward with information. This investigation isn't about assigning blame, but about creating the airline we claim to be, one where every passenger and employee is treated with equal respect and dignity. She approved the final version for immediate distribution to all Skyline employees worldwide. Then she called Devon again. "Communication looks strong," he said before she could ask. "Legal has approved it, and it's queued for distribution through all employee channels at 6 o'clock Eastern. What's the latest on Reynolds?" Increasing desperation. He's called 3 board members who weren't at yesterday's emergency meeting, trying to build opposition to the investigation. One recorded the call and forwarded it to Chairman Chen. "Reynolds claimed you're manufacturing a crisis to consolidate power." Predictable, Vivian noted. And the employee response to the initial investigation? Overwhelming. Once word spread that we're seriously addressing discrimination, we've received 43 new reports of incidents from customer-facing staff across multiple airports and divisions. Many specifically name Walsh, but others implicate at least 12 other flight attendants and several lounge managers. Are the patterns consistent? Remarkably so. Black and brown passengers in premium cabins or lounges being questioned, scrutinized, or provided inferior service compared to white passengers. Several employees reported being told explicitly by supervisors to be extra careful with certain passengers who might not belong in premium spaces. Vivian absorbed this information, her determination strengthening with each confirmation of the systemic nature of the problem. What about Karen Walsh specifically? She's hired an attorney specializing in employment disputes. They've sent a letter claiming Walsh is being scapegoated for following established practices and threatening legal action for defamation and discriminatory termination. As expected, forward the letter to legal for assessment but don't respond yet. What about Captain Pearson and James Chen? Both providing detailed statements. Pearson has documented 3 previous incidents where he witnessed similar discrimination, but felt powerless to intervene effectively. Chen has identified 7 other flight attendants willing to testify about the unofficial culture code regarding who belongs in first class. And Pacific West? Any reaction to our internal investigation? Their general counsel requested a briefing on potential liability exposure that might affect the merger. I provided a carefully worded update emphasizing our proactive approach and commitment to resolving any issues prior to completion. Vivian nodded. Schedule that briefing for tomorrow afternoon, after our board meeting. I want to be transparent with them about what we found and how we're addressing it. No surprises during due diligence. Understood. One more thing. We've uncovered a disturbing pattern in hiring and promotion within premium service divisions. Despite Skyline's overall diversity metrics meeting industry standards, first-class cabin crews and lounge staff are overwhelmingly white, with qualified candidates of color routinely passed over. Who controlled those hiring decisions? A key committee officially, but with significant input from both Dawson and Reynolds. The statistical disparity is stark enough to potentially violate EEOC guidelines. This added yet another dimension to the investigation, not just discrimination against passengers, but systematic exclusion of employees of color from premium service roles. Document everything, Vivian instructed, and expand the investigation to include hiring and promotion practices across all customer-facing divisions. After ending the call, Vivian opened her laptop to review the growing body of evidence. The Taylor documents were particularly damning. Detailed records of how complaints were systematically buried, witnesses pressured, and evidence obscured. Reynolds had created an elaborate system of plausible deniability while actively protecting discriminatory practices. At 6 o'clock Eastern Time, her company-wide communication went out to all Skyline employees. Within minutes, Her phone began receiving notifications of responses, many expressing shock at the investigation's scope, others sharing relief that long-standing issues were finally being addressed, and some offering additional information about incidents they had witnessed or experienced. One message in particular caught her attention, from Karen Walsh herself. Ms. Winters, I understand you're conducting a broader investigation beyond our unfortunate interaction. Before this escalates further, I'd like to speak with you directly. There are aspects of Skyline's culture that I've been constrained by, rather than created. Interesting. Walsh seemed to be positioning herself as a potential witness, rather than merely a perpetrator. Vivian forwarded the message to Devon with instructions to arrange a formal interview with Walsh and her attorney, properly documented and with legal representation for Skyline. Her phone rang, Jason Chen calling unexpectedly. Vivian, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening, he began. Not at all, Jason. What can I do for you? I've just received a rather unusual call from Thomas Reynolds, he said, his tone carefully neutral. He suggested I should be concerned about the stability of Skyline's leadership, given what he described as an internal power struggle triggered by a minor customer service incident. Vivian's grip tightened on her phone. Reynolds was attempting to undermine the merger directly. That's a significant mischaracterization, she replied evenly. As I mentioned, we're addressing some customer service inconsistencies, specifically patterns of discriminatory treatment, that were brought to light recently. There's no power struggle, simply an investigation into practices that don't align with our corporate values or legal obligations. He specifically mentioned you might be forced to step back from negotiations if the situation escalates. That's completely false, Vivian stated firmly. I have the full support of Chairman Chen and the majority of the board in addressing these issues while simultaneously pursuing our merger discussions. I was planning to brief your team tomorrow on exactly what we've uncovered and how we're resolving it. Jason was silent for a moment. I appreciate your transparency, Vivian. Reynolds' approach struck me as unusually personal and potentially self-serving, which is why I thought it best to contact you directly. I'm grateful you did. To be completely candid, the investigation has uncovered evidence that Reynolds himself may have been involved in concealing discriminatory practices. His system access has been temporarily suspended pending the investigation's completion. Ah, Jason said, understanding dawning in his voice. That explains the nature of his call. For what it's worth, I've always found that addressing problems directly builds stronger organizations than pretending they don't exist. Precisely my philosophy as well. Good, then I look forward to tomorrow's briefing and continuing our productive negotiations. After ending the call, Vivian immediately contacted Chairman Chen to inform him of Reynolds' attempt to undermine the merger. Chen was furious. This crosses a line from internal resistance to actively damaging shareholder value, he said. I'll call an emergency executive session of the board first thing tomorrow morning to address his conduct. Vivian's next call was to Devon. Reynolds reached out directly to Pacific West trying to sabotage the merger, accelerate everything. I want the full board briefing at 7 a.m. Pacific tomorrow before the Pacific West meetings. And we need to identify and secure every piece of evidence immediately. Reynolds is getting desperate. Devon promised to handle the logistics while Vivian turned her attention to preparing for tomorrow's critical meetings. The investigation had unexpectedly expanded into a comprehensive examination of Skyline's culture, exposing layers of discrimination that had been systematically concealed for years. What had begun as a personal confrontation at a boarding gate was revealing a corporate structure designed to protect bias rather than eliminate it. Her phone chimed with a new message from Devon. Reynolds sent company-wide email claiming investigation is politically motivated and urging employees to maintain perspective about isolated incidents. ET intercepted using your emergency authority, but he's clearly escalating. Vivian wasn't surprised by the desperate tactic. Release his email, along with our response detailing the statistical evidence of discrimination patterns. Transparency is our best weapon against his attempts to minimize and deflect. By midnight, as Vivian finally prepared for a few hours of sleep, the situation had transformed from an investigation into a single incident to a company-wide reckoning with years of systematic discrimination. Reynolds' increasingly desperate attempts to contain the damage only confirmed the depth of the problem and his personal involvement in perpetuating it. Tomorrow would bring the full revelation to the board, potentially ending Reynolds' career and certainly reshaping Skyline's culture forever. It would also determine whether the Pacific West merger could proceed amid the internal upheaval. As she drifted toward sleep, Vivian reflected on how Karen Walsh's assumption about who belonged in first class had inadvertently triggered a corporate revolution. Sometimes transformation required a catalyst, someone in the right position, at the right moment to challenge entrenched systems of bias. Tomorrow, those systems would face their day of reckoning. The conference room at the Four Seasons Hotel buzzed with tension as Vivian prepared for the 7 a.m. board meeting. Through the secure video connection, she could see board members gathering in Atlanta, their expressions ranging from concern to curiosity to outright hostility. Thomas Reynolds sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched, while Chairman Chen reviewed documents at the head of the table. Devin Carter and Sophia Lee joined Vivian in San Francisco, providing both moral and professional support for the presentation that would forever change Skyline Aviation. On the side table, breakfast pastries remained untouched as the team focused on their final preparations. "All 12 board members confirmed," Devin murmured. "First time we've had full attendance in months." Reynolds insisted everyone needed to hear his side, Sophia added. "Inadvertently did us a favor by ensuring maximum exposure for our findings." Vivian nodded, making a final review of her presentation. The evidence was overwhelming, not just of discriminatory practices, but of the systematic effort to conceal them. This meeting would determine whether Skyline embraced accountability or continued enabling discrimination. At precisely 7 o'clock, Chairman Chen called the meeting to order. "Good morning, directors. We're convened to address serious allegations regarding discriminatory practices within Skyline Aviation and potential governance violations in handling those issues. CEO Winters will present the findings of her preliminary investigation, followed by response time for those implicated. Given the sensitivity and potential legal implications, this meeting is being recorded with full minutes taken." Chen nodded to Vivian. "Ms. Winters, please proceed." Vivian activated her presentation, which appeared on screens in both locations. "Thank you, Chairman Chen. Directors, what began as a personal experience of discrimination during boarding has revealed a disturbing pattern of similar incidents throughout our premium services, along with evidence that these patterns were known, concealed, and protected by certain members of leadership." She methodically presented the evidence. Statistical analysis of complaint resolution rates showing clear racial disparities, documentation of Karen Walsh's history of similar incidents, testimony from employees about unofficial practices regarding who belonged in premium spaces, and finally, the bombshell emails and memos showing Reynolds' direct involvement in suppressing the 2022 investigation. These communications demonstrate that Director Reynolds, while serving as SVP of Customer Experience, established systematic mechanisms to dismiss discrimination complaints and protect employees engaged in discriminatory behavior, Vivian explained, highlighting key passages where Reynolds had instructed Dawson to ensure complaints never reach the CEO's desk. Reynolds interrupted, his face flushed. "This is a gross mischaracterization of routine operational communications. Those emails referred to frivolous complaints, not legitimate discrimination issues." "The statistical evidence contradicts that claim," Vivian replied calmly. "Complaints from white passengers were resolved favorably 83% of the time, while identical complaints from passengers of color were dismissed 63% of the time. That's not random variation or frivolity, it's a pattern." Another board member spoke up. Catherine Williams, a retired federal judge known for her commitment to ethical governance. "The evidence presented suggests not only discriminatory practices but a deliberate effort to conceal them from both the CEO and the board. This raises serious governance and fiduciary concerns." Reynolds leaned forward. "This entire investigation has been conducted without due process or proper oversight. Ms. Winters has a clear conflict of interest, having been personally involved in the triggering incident. and the speed with which this has escalated suggests a predetermined agenda rather than a fair investigation. The investigation has followed all company protocols, Sophia interjected. The only unusual aspect is the speed, which was necessitated by active attempts to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. Attempts we have documented. Chairman Chen redirected the discussion. Before we continue with rebuttals, I'd like to hear from some of the employees who have provided testimony about these practices. At Chen's signal, Captain William Pearson joined the video conference, followed by James Chen and 3 other flight attendants. One by one, they described what they had witnessed. The unofficial culture code about who belonged in premium cabins, the pressure to scrutinize passengers of color, the dismissal of complaints, and the retaliation against employees who objected. I've been with Skyline for 12 years, said Lisa Morales, a flight attendant based in Chicago. I was explicitly told during training for premium cabin service to use my judgment about passengers who might not belong in first class. When I asked for clarification, the trainer said, "You know what first-class passengers look like," while making a gesture suggesting whiteness. When I reported this to my supervisor, I was removed from premium cabin rotation for 3 months for being too sensitive. Similar testimonies followed, each more damning than the last. Reynolds and his allies on the board appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the pattern became undeniable. When the employee testimonies concluded, Vivian continued her presentation, shifting to the hiring and promotion disparities in premium service divisions. Despite qualified candidates of color applying at rates consistent with industry averages, our premium service teams remain 94% white, far exceeding what random distribution would produce. The committee overseeing these hiring decisions reported directly to Mr. Reynolds until his board appointment and subsequently to his selected successor, Michael Dawson. She concluded by presenting the legal and financial implications. Our analysis indicates potential liability under multiple anti-discrimination statutes, with possible damages in the millions if this became a class action. More significantly, the reputational damage could severely impact customer loyalty, particularly among our growing diverse customer base, who represent 68% of our projected growth markets. Chairman Chen thanked Vivian for the comprehensive presentation. Mr. Reynolds, you may now respond to these findings. Reynolds had regained his composure during the presentations, crafting his defense. Chairman, directors, while I respect Ms. Winter's concern about discriminatory practices, I categorically deny any personal involvement in concealing legitimate complaints. The emails presented have been taken out of context from broader operational discussions. He leaned forward, his tone becoming more confident. Yes, I sought to protect employees from unfounded accusations, as any good leader would. Yes, I established processes to properly vet complaints before escalating them. But there was never any intent to enable discrimination, only to ensure operational efficiency and employee morale. Addressing the statistics, Reynolds continued, correlation doesn't imply causation. The disparities presented could result from numerous factors unrelated to racial bias. A proper investigation would explore all possibilities before reaching such damaging conclusions. He turned his attention directly to Vivian. As for Ms. Winters' personal experience, while unfortunate, it represents a single incident being used to suggest a systemic problem. Ms. Walsh has served Skyline faithfully for 15 years. One misunderstanding shouldn't end her career or trigger a company-wide upheaval during critical merger negotiations. Reynolds played his final card. Which brings me to my gravest concern. This hastily launched investigation, led by an executive with an obvious conflict of interest, has already disrupted operations and could potentially derail the Pacific West merger, destroying shareholder value based on incomplete evidence and rushed judgment. I move that the board suspend this irregular process immediately, appoint an independent investigator, and return Ms. Winters' focus to the merger where it belongs. The boardroom fell silent as directors absorbed Reynolds' defense. It was skillfully constructed, appealing to business pragmatism while avoiding direct denial of the documented evidence. Before anyone could respond, the conference room door in Atlanta opened and Karen Walsh entered, accompanied by her attorney. Chairman Chen looked surprised. Ms. Walsh, this portion of the meeting wasn't scheduled to include your testimony. I requested her presence, Reynolds said quickly. As the employee whose actions supposedly revealed this systemic problem, she deserves the opportunity to present her perspective. Chen looked to Vivian, who nodded. I have no objection to hearing Ms. Walsh's testimony. Walsh took a seat. At the conference table, visibly nervous but determined. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, whispering something before she began speaking. Board members, Ms. Winters, Walsh began, her voice steadier than her demeanor. I want to first acknowledge that my interaction with Ms. Winters at the boarding gate was inappropriate and reflected assumptions I should never have made. For that specific incident, I offer my sincere apology. She paused, glancing at her attorney, who nodded encouragingly. However, I feel compelled to provide context about the environment in which such incidents occur. Throughout my 15 years at Skyline, I received consistent informal guidance about maintaining standards in premium cabins and being extra vigilant about passengers who might not belong. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably as Walsh continued. This guidance never explicitly mentioned race, but the examples and contextual cues made the expectations clear. When passengers of color complained about additional scrutiny, we were instructed to classify these as misunderstandings rather than potential discrimination. Walsh turned directly to Vivian. Ms. Winters, while I take full responsibility for my actions toward you, I want the board to understand that I was operating within a culture that tacitly encouraged such behavior while providing plausible deniability to leadership. Reynolds interrupted sharply. Ms. Walsh, no one ever instructed you to discriminate against passengers. You're attempting to deflect personal responsibility by implicating the entire company. Walsh's attorney spoke for the first time. My client is providing truthful testimony about the organizational culture she experienced, as requested by this board. She has documentation of training materials and communications that support her statements. The attorney produced a folder. These include emails from Mr. Dawson praising Ms. Walsh for maintaining standards after incidents where passengers of color filed complaints about her behavior. We have similar communications regarding 6 other flight attendants, all following the same pattern. Official reprimands avoided, discriminatory behavior implicitly rewarded. This unexpected testimony created a palpable shift in the boardroom. Reynolds had clearly expected Walsh to defend herself in the company, not provide additional evidence of systematic discrimination. Catherine Williams spoke again. Ms. Walsh, are you stating that you believe leadership knowingly encouraged discriminatory practices while maintaining deniability? Yes, ma'am, Walsh replied firmly. The messaging was consistent but carefully worded. We understood what was expected regarding certain passengers while leadership maintained technically non-discriminatory policies on paper. Another board member, who had previously seemed aligned with Reynolds, now addressed him directly. Thomas, these allegations are extremely concerning. If leadership created a culture of implicit bias while maintaining surface compliance with anti-discrimination policies, that represents a serious governance failure. Reynolds recognized his position crumbling. This is absurd. We're allowing a disgruntled employee facing termination to make unfounded accusations without proper investigation. Of course, she's trying to shift blame to leadership. Vivian spoke for the first time since Walsh's appearance. Actually, Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Walsh's testimony aligns precisely with what dozens of other employees have reported independently. A culture where discrimination was tacitly encouraged while leadership maintained plausible deniability. The consistency, across divisions and locations, suggests a systemic issue rather than individual misconduct. Chairman Chen reclaimed control of the meeting. I believe we've heard sufficient evidence to reach some preliminary conclusions. This appears to be not merely isolated incidents, but a pattern of discriminatory practices that was, at minimum, tolerated by leadership and potentially actively protected through inappropriate governance practices. He looked around the boardroom. I propose the following actions. First, we formalize and expand the investigation under independent oversight, with results reported directly to the full board. Second, we temporarily suspend Thomas Reynolds from board duties pending investigation outcomes. Third, We place Michael Dawson and other implicated executives on administrative leave. Fourth, we authorize Ms. Winters to implement immediate corrective actions regarding discriminatory practices while the investigation continues. Reynolds made one final attempt. Lawrence, this is an overreaction that could severely damage the company. At least delay these actions until after the Pacific West merger is secured. On the contrary, Chen replied firmly, addressing these issues transparently is essential to the merger's success. Pacific West deserves to know exactly what they're merging with. Both our strengths and the challenges we're actively addressing. The board voted on Chen's proposed actions. Despite Reynolds' efforts, the evidence was too compelling to ignore. By a vote of 10-2, with only Reynolds and one ally opposing, the board approved all 4 measures. Ms. Winters, Chen said, turning to the video screen. You have the board's full support to address these issues while continuing the merger negotiations. Is there anything else you need from us at this time? Just your continued commitment to transparency and accountability, Vivian replied. The evidence suggests these practices have existed for years. Changing them will require sustained effort and consistent messaging from leadership at all levels. You have our commitment, Chen assured her, as most board members nodded in agreement. This board will not tolerate discrimination in any form, nor the concealment of such practices. As the meeting concluded, Reynolds sat isolated at the table, his decades-long career at Skyline effectively ended by his own actions and the courage of those who had finally spoken truth to power. Outside the conference room, Devon turned to Vivian. That went even better than we hoped. Walsh's testimony completely undermined Reynolds' defense. It wasn't just Walsh, Vivian noted. It was the cumulative weight of evidence from dozens of employees, the statistical analysis, and the documentary proof. Reynolds created a system he thought was impenetrable, but it only took one catalyst to bring it down. Sophia checked her. Watch. Your meeting with Pacific West begins in 30 minutes. How do you want to approach the disclosure about our internal investigation? With complete transparency, Vivian decided. We'll present what we found, the actions we're taking, and our commitment to creating a truly inclusive airline. If they're the right partners for us, they'll value addressing these issues openly rather than hiding them. As they gathered their materials for the next meeting, Vivian reflected on the journey from that moment at the boarding gate to this company-wide reckoning. What Reynolds had failed to understand was that true leadership wasn't about protecting the status quo, but about having the courage to change it when it failed to reflect your values. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter for Skyline Aviation, one where every passenger truly belonged in whatever seat they had purchased, and where employees were valued for their competence rather than their willingness to perpetuate bias. The reckoning had been painful, but necessary. The transformation would be challenging but worthwhile, and the result would be an airline that finally lived up to its professed values of excellence and inclusion for all. 6 months later, Vivian Winters sat in the Atlanta International Airport Skyline Premier Lounge, reviewing the final documentation for Karen Walsh's termination. The extensive investigation had confirmed a pattern of discriminatory behavior, spanning years, with multiple passengers subjected to the same treatment Vivian had experienced. Despite Walsh's cooperation in exposing the broader cultural issues, her personal actions warranted termination under Skyline's revised anti-discrimination policies. Vivian signed the document with a sense of completion rather than triumph. This wasn't about punishing one flight attendant, but about establishing clear standards that would reshape the company's culture moving forward. Ms. Winters? A voice interrupted her thoughts. Karen Walsh stood before her, face pale but composed, having been summoned to receive the final decision personally. Ms. Walsh, Vivian acknowledged, gesturing to the chair across from her. Please sit down. Walsh took the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I understand the board has made its final decision. Yes. Vivian slid the document across the table. Your employment with Skyline Aviation is terminated effective immediately. The investigation confirmed 12 separate incidents of discriminatory treatment toward passengers over the past 3 years, including the incident involving me. Walsh nodded, having expected this outcome. I understand, and I accept the consequences of my actions. Your testimony about the cultural factors that enabled such behavior was valuable, Vivian acknowledged. It helped us address systemic issues rather than simply removing individual employees. However, personal responsibility remains essential. I know, Walsh replied quietly. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have recognized how my actions affected passengers. The bias training we received during the investigation opened my eyes to patterns I didn't even realize I was perpetuating. Vivian studied the woman who had once refused to believe she belonged in first class. That self-awareness is important, Ms. Walsh. I hope you'll carry it forward into your future endeavors. I will. Walsh hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I truly am sorry for how I treated you and others. I can't undo that harm, but I've learned from it. That's all any of us can do when we recognize our mistakes, Vivian said. Learn and improve. As Walsh left with her termination papers, Vivian reflected on the extraordinary transformation Skyline had undergone in the 6 months since that fateful confrontation at the boarding gate. The investigation had ultimately uncovered discriminatory practices extending far beyond premium cabins, affecting hiring, promotion, route assignments, and vendor selection throughout the company. Thomas Reynolds had indeed created an elaborate system of plausible deniability, allowing bias to flourish while maintaining technically compliant policies on paper. Reynolds himself had resigned from the board rather than face the complete investigation. Findings: Michael Dawson and 4 other executives implicated in concealing discrimination had been terminated. The governance structures that had protected biased practices had been dismantled and rebuilt with transparency and accountability at their core. Most significantly, Devin Carter had been promoted to the newly created position of Chief Diversity Officer, with real authority and direct board reporting responsibility. Under his leadership, Skyline had implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing employees, revised complaint handling procedures, and established clear metrics for measuring improvement. The results were already apparent. Customer satisfaction scores among passengers of color had increased 27%. Employee retention had improved across all demographics. And the airline industry publications had taken notice with Skyline featured in a recent article titled The Diversity Transformation: How One Airline Revolutionized Its Culture. Vivian's phone chimed with a message from Jason Chen, now her co-CEO following the successful completion of the Skyline Pacific West merger 3 months ago. Board presentation ready for review. Meet you in the executive conference room in 20 minutes. She texted her confirmation and gathered her materials. The merged airline, now operating under the name Horizon Global, had quickly established itself as an industry leader not just in routes and services, but in corporate culture and inclusive excellence. The Pacific West team had ultimately been impressed, rather than deterred by Skyline's transparent handling of its discrimination issues. As Jason had commented during the final merger negotiations, a company willing to confront its problems honestly is one we can trust to build a better future together. As Vivian walked through the terminal toward the administrative offices, she noticed the changes that had become Skyline's, now Horizon's, new standard. The customer service teams reflected the diversity of the passengers they served. The premium cabin and lounge staff included people of all backgrounds, selected for their skills rather than their appearance, and the training materials prominently displayed throughout employee areas emphasized that excellence meant equal treatment for all passengers, without exception or assumption. The executive conference room buzzed with activity as the leadership team prepared for tomorrow's quarterly board meeting. Jason looked up from his laptop as Vivian entered. "Just signed off on Walsh's termination?" he asked. "Yes, the final case from the original investigation." "Symbolic closure," Jason noted, "though the real work continues." "Always," Vivian agreed, taking her seat at the table. The merged executive team represented the best of both airlines, diverse in background, experience, and perspective. What they shared was a commitment to the transformation Vivian had initiated and Jason had embraced, creating an airline where excellence and inclusion were inseparable values. Devin Carter joined them, tablet in hand. "Final diversity metrics for the quarter are impressive," he reported. "Hiring targets met or exceeded across all divisions. Complaint resolution rates now statistically consistent across all passenger demographics. Employee satisfaction up 12 points among previously underrepresented groups. And the new anti-bias training program? Vivian asked. 97% completion rate company-wide, Devon confirmed. And the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Employees appreciate having clear guidelines rather than unspoken expectations. The remainder of the executive team arrived, and the meeting proceeded with final preparations for the board presentation. The merged company was not only meeting its financial projections, but exceeding them, with cost synergies achieved more quickly than anticipated, and customer loyalty metrics trending positively across all markets. After the meeting concluded, Vivian found herself alone with Devon, reviewing the journey they had taken together over the past 6 months. "When you texted me from that plane about Karen Walsh," Devon recalled, "I never imagined it would lead to this level of transformation. Honestly, I thought we'd end up with a token reprimand and another diversity statement that changed nothing." "So did I initially," Vivian admitted. "But once we started pulling the thread, the entire tapestry unraveled." Reynolds had built his discriminatory system so carefully that he never considered it might collapse all at once. "His fatal flaw was underestimating you," Devon observed. "He assumed you'd prioritize the merger and your CEO position over addressing discrimination directly. A common miscalculation," Vivian noted with a slight smile. "Assuming that professional success and commitment to equality are somehow mutually exclusive." "The industry is noticing," Devon said. 3 other airlines have reached out to me about our transformation process. They're recognizing that inclusive excellence isn't just morally right, it's good business." "That's the message that creates lasting change," Vivian agreed. "When companies realize that discrimination costs them talent, customers, and ultimately profit, transformation becomes inevitable." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. James Chen, the flight attendant who had recognized Vivian on that fateful flight, entered with a hesitant smile. "Ms. Winters, Mr. Carter," he greeted them. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, James," Vivian assured him. "How are you finding your new role?" Following his courageous testimony during the investigation, James had been promoted to Premium Service Training Manager, responsible for ensuring all flight attendants understood and implemented the company's new inclusive excellence standards. "It's challenging but rewarding," he replied. "Just finished training our newest cohort of first-class cabin crew. Most diverse group we've ever had, and their customer service scores during training were the highest on record, contradicting the old assumption that diversity somehow compromises quality," Devon noted with satisfaction. "Exactly," James agreed. "I actually came to share some news that I thought would interest you both. Robert Taylor, the investigator, who was reassigned after the 2022 report, has accepted our offer to return as Deputy Director of Compliance under Devon's division." "Excellent," Vivian said. "His experience and integrity will be valuable assets as we continue this transformation." After James departed, Vivian gathered her materials for her next meeting, a media interview about the merger's success and Horizon Global's emerging reputation as an industry leader in both performance and corporate culture. As she walked through the terminal, she passed Gate 27, the very spot where Karen Walsh had questioned her presence in the first-class line 6 months earlier. The same gate now featured a prominent display of Horizon's new corporate values: excellence, inclusion, integrity, innovation. Beneath those words was a phrase Vivian had personally insisted on including in the company's revised mission statement. "Every passenger belongs in the seat they've chosen. Every employee belongs in the role they've earned. We succeed together by recognizing and respecting the dignity of all." What had begun as a moment of discrimination had catalyzed a corporate revolution. One flight attendant's bias had exposed a system designed to protect such behavior. One CEO's refusal to accept that bias had transformed an entire airline. As Vivian prepared to board her flight, in first class naturally, she reflected on the power of that transformation. Skyline hadn't merely addressed isolated incidents of discrimination. It had fundamentally redesigned its culture, policies and practices to ensure such behavior could never again be normalized or protected. The final quarterly report summarizing the investigation had concluded with words that Vivian had written herself. Discrimination thrives in silence and deniability. It withers in the light of honest recognition and accountable leadership. Our journey toward truly inclusive excellence has only begun, but our direction is irreversible. What we have learned through this process will forever shape how we serve our passengers, support our employees, and define our success. Boarding began, and Vivian approached the gate with her first-class ticket. The flight attendant, a young black woman who had been hired during the recent diversity initiative, smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, Ms. Winters. Welcome aboard. Horizon Global Flight 1242. We're honored to have you flying with us today." As she settled into seat 2A, the same seat she had occupied on that transformative flight 6 months ago, Vivian felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The company she led now truly embodied the values it proclaimed. Every passenger genuinely belonged in whatever seat they had purchased. Every employee was valued for their competence rather than their conformity to biased expectations. Sometimes, transformation required the right person to be in the wrong place at precisely the right time. 6 months ago, Vivian Winters had been that person, and an entire company culture had changed as a result. What do you think about Vivian's journey and the transformation she created at Skyline? Have you ever witnessed someone turn discrimination into an opportunity for systemic change? Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Don't forget to like this video if you found Vivian's story inspiring, subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and transformation, and share this with someone who needs to hear that one person truly can make a difference. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest change begins with a single moment of courage. This powerful story reminds us that systemic discrimination often persists because those with authority protect and normalize it. Vivian's journey demonstrates that meaningful change requires both individual courage and institutional accountability. When bias becomes embedded in corporate culture, it takes strategic leadership to dismantle the systems that perpetuate it. The most significant transformation occurs when we address root causes rather than symptoms. Reynolds created a structure where discrimination could flourish while maintaining plausible deniability, a common tactic in corporate environments. By methodically gathering evidence and building alliances, Vivian exposed not just individual acts of bias, but the entire framework supporting them. True leadership means using power responsibly to create inclusive environments where everyone belongs. Vivian could have accepted an apology and moved on, protecting her merger and avoiding conflict. Instead, she recognized her unique position to address injustice that affected countless others without her authority. The story also highlights how discrimination thrives in silence and ambiguity. The culture code at Skyline relied on implicit understanding rather than explicit directives, allowing bias to persist while avoiding accountability. By bringing these practices into the light, Vivian created the transparency necessary for genuine transformation. Has discrimination ever made you feel like you didn't belong somewhere? Or have you witnessed someone being treated unfairly based on their identity? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire others to speak up. If this powerful journey of transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of courage and justice. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one person truly can create systemic change. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest power lies in refusing to accept the status quo.